You check your balance the same way you always do. Not urgently. Not nervously. Just a small pause in your day that feels automatic now. You already know what you're going to see. Enough to get by. Enough to keep moving. Nothing alarming. And yet, you don't feel relieved. There's no spike of fear. No, oh no moment. Just a quiet, familiar tightness. Like something is slightly off, but you can't point to where. You close the app. You don't calculate. You don't adjust anything. Life continues exactly as it was a few seconds ago. From the outside, this moment looks like nothing. No drama. No stress. No visible problem. But inside, there's that same thought you've had before, even if you never say it clearly. Why does this still feel like this? You're not broke. You're not irresponsible. You're not in trouble. So why does the feeling linger? It follows you not as panic, but as familiarity. And that's the part that stays with you. From the outside, your life reads as fine. You wake up when you're supposed to. You show up. You do what needs to be done. Bills get paid. Not late. Not dramatically. Work moves forward. Emails answered. Tasks completed. People around you don't worry about you, because there's no reason to. You don't borrow. You don't panic spend. You don't make reckless choices that explode everything overnight. If someone asked how you're doing, you'd probably say, yeah, it's good. And you wouldn't be lying. This is what makes it confusing. Because nothing in your life signals struggle. There's no obvious problem to point at. No single bad decision to regret. You're functional, capable, reasonable. And yet, there's a quiet sense of tightness that never really leaves. Not broke, just constrained. You notice it in small moments. When an invitation comes up and your first thought isn't excitement, it's mental math. When something breaks and you sigh, not because it's expensive, but because it disrupts the balance you're carefully maintaining. When you hesitate before buying something ordinary, not because you can't afford it, but because you don't want to feel less comfortable later. You've learned how to keep things steady. You know which expenses are safe, which ones require a pause, which ones you avoid thinking about altogether. People assume stability looks like freedom. But for you, it feels more like maintenance. You're always aware. Aware of timing. Aware of margins. Aware of how much flexibility you actually have. It's not stress in the loud sense. It's background tension. The kind that doesn't interrupt your day, it just colors it. And because everything looks fine, you don't talk about it. There's nothing dramatic to explain. No crisis to justify the feeling. So you keep moving. You handle things. You adapt. You stay responsible. And quietly, without ever naming it, you carry the sense that life is being held together. Not loosely, not comfortably, but just tight enough to work. It hits you quietly. A paycheck comes in. A little bigger than last month. Not life-changing, just more than usual. You log in, check the number. And for a moment, you expect relief. A small sigh of satisfaction. A sense that things are moving forward. But the feeling doesn't arrive. The total looks fine. Comfortable, even. But your chest doesn't feel lighter. Your mind doesn't feel freer. You wonder, wasn't this supposed to change something? Later, maybe a weekend rolls around. A little extra money lingers in your account. You go through your usual errands, your regular coffee, the occasional indulgence you've learned to allow. And yet, the pattern is the same. The same. You thought a raise would mean breathing room. A bonus would mean possibilities. A better month would feel like progress. And it doesn't. It's subtle. So subtle that if you're not paying attention, you'll just carry on. You notice it in the small things. The impulse to calculate before saying yes to a plan. The hesitation when scrolling through your favorite online stores. The quiet tally in your head of what's really flexible and what isn't. You realize the moment isn't dramatic. No crisis, no mistake, no oops. It's just a shift. A tiny mental nudge. The system you've built, the structure you've internalized, is still in control. You've added a little more income, a little more comfort, and yet your behavior hasn't changed. You see yourself, not as careless or incapable, but as remarkably predictable. And in that instant, you start to notice the patterns you'd never named. The way small choices repeat. The way habits compound. The way your decisions, reasonable, sensible, aligned with who you think you are, quietly shape the rhythm of your life. It isn't shocking. It isn't dramatic. But it's unmistakable. You catch yourself thinking, wait, yes. That's exactly when it started. And just like that, the fog lifts for a moment. Not enough to panic, but enough to notice. You see the quiet currents beneath your daily life. And something shifts. You're not wrong. You're just guided. A little differently than you expected. It starts almost invisibly. You notice a new coffee shop on your way to work. The fancy latte costs a little more than your usual. You pause, then shrug. Why not? It's just a small treat. A month later, it's routine. You don't think twice. The price doesn't shock you. The indulgence doesn't feel indulgent anymore. It's simply part of the rhythm of your morning. The same happens elsewhere. A slightly nicer chair for your desk. A subscription you never canceled. A gadget that makes life easier, or at least feels like it should. Each choice is tiny, defensible, reasonable, sensible. No alarms. No splurges that would make anyone blink. Just alignment. You start to notice a pattern, though only when you pause for a moment. The little upgrades aren't upgrades anymore. They've quietly become baseline. Your expenses shift incrementally, almost without intention. You're still careful. You still feel responsible. But the bar has moved, and you didn't even notice. You catch yourself thinking, I'm not reckless. I'm making smart choices. And you are. In isolation, each decision is exactly what a careful person would do. Yet, taken together, the picture looks different. Your habits haven't changed. But your life has. The systems you interact with, the stores, the menus, the ads, the routines, all nudge you just enough. You follow the cues, thinking you're choosing freely, when really, you're stepping along a path quietly laid out for you. Even the language you use with yourself reinforces it. I deserve this. It's within my budget. Everyone does this. The narrative feels right. Logical. And that's the subtle trap. You didn't suddenly spend recklessly. You simply allowed your baseline to shift while believing you were steady. A new subscription here. A slightly larger purchase there. The occasional convenience fee. None of it seems excessive. None of it feels wrong. But over weeks, months, years, compounds. And you begin to recognize a strange truth. The life you thought you were living isn't entirely accidental. It's guided by tiny nudges you rarely notice, nudges that align perfectly with the version of yourself you already believe you are. A quiet awareness creeps in. You see the drift, the subtle slide toward a new standard. And even as you observe it, you continue along the path, because it feels natural. Reasonable. Yet beneath that comfort, a small tension builds. You nod slowly, almost reluctantly, as you admit to yourself, yeah, that's me. The realization isn't dramatic. There's no guilt. Just recognition. Your choices feel earned. Your life feels earned. And yet, you sense the quiet shift. Behavioral drift. Reasonable. Undetectable, until you finally see it. You glance at your account again. The numbers are fine. More than fine even. Paychecks land, bills leave, balances rise and fall. Everything is working exactly as it should. And yet, you feel the same. It's subtle. A quiet heaviness, like walking on a treadmill that's just slightly too fast. You're moving, putting in effort, but the scenery never changes. You look at the little wins, a raise, a paid-off bill, a new gadget, and for a moment, there's pride. Then the feeling fades. Money comes in. Money goes out. The distance between where you are and where you want to be never closes. You start noticing patterns. The moment you earn a bit more, your baseline shifts. A new subscription here, a slightly nicer habit there. Progress doesn't feel like progress. Feels normal. Routine. Expected. You thought better months would feel different. They don't. You thought careful planning would ease the tension. It doesn't. And the realization settles softly. Your life isn't broken. It's just aligned in a way that keeps you moving without moving forward. It's here that the feeling of always broke lives. Not in numbers, not in mistakes, not in panic. It lives in the quiet gap between effort and reward, between intention and experience. You can trace it in small habits. The extra coffee, the convenience fee, the little upgrades. Each one reasonable. Each one justifiable. Each one nudging you forward along a path that feels natural, and yet keeps you from gaining real ground. You don't panic. You don't feel shame. You just notice. The treadmill is well designed. It keeps you occupied, moving, productive, and yet stationary. You feel the weight of it not as alarm, but as quiet awareness. It's strange, almost comforting in a way. You aren't failing. You aren't careless. You're simply part of a system that subtly aligns your spending, your habits, your life, so that the appearance of progress never quite matches the experience of freedom. And in that silence, in that space between movement and arrival, you begin to see the pattern. It isn't dramatic. It isn't loud. It's just stillness disguised as motion. And that's where most people live. Quietly moving. Quietly stuck. And now you can see it. You're sitting quietly, maybe scrolling through a recent bank alert, maybe just thinking about the week. Nothing urgent demands your attention. Nothing catastrophic has happened. And yet, a thought drifts in, soft but unmistakable. I don't actually know what enough feels like anymore. It's not loud. It doesn't come with alarm bells or flashing red numbers. No spreadsheets, no lectures, no advice from a blog or app. Just a pause. A quiet awareness that your sense of sufficiency has quietly slipped out of reach. You consider it for a moment. You could try to define it. A number in your account, a budget goal, a target lifestyle. But it doesn't settle. It never has. You realize that over time, your expectations shifted without you noticing. Small, reasonable choices aligned with habits, convenience, and identity. And somewhere along the way, the benchmark of enough moved further away, just a little at a time. It isn't shame you feel. It isn't panic. It isn't guilt. It's clarity. A mental stillness opens. You see the patterns of your spending, your upgrades, your choices. Not as mistakes. Not as failures. Simply as a path you've been walking, quietly, predictably, subtly guided. For the first time, it's possible to look at your life without judgment. To notice where the small nudges have led. To see the flow of money, habits, and expectations as part of a system rather than a reflection of your worth. And in that stillness, you feel something unusual. Space. Space to think. Space to reflect. Space to recognize that control isn't always about discipline or sacrifice. Sometimes, control is just noticing the currents that shape your decisions, and understanding that you can respond or simply observe without guilt. You let the thought settle. No solutions, no rush. Just awareness. And somewhere beneath the quiet, a subtle shift begins. Your vision of your own life is no longer blurred by habit and expectation. It's just clear. And that clarity, small as it is, changes everything. It hits quietly, this pattern. Not with alarms or judgment, but with subtle inevitability. And the reason it works so well? Not because you're careless. Not because you overspend or lack discipline. It works because you are capable. You are responsible. You notice what needs attention and you act. You adapt quickly. You take new information and adjust, and that's usually your strength. But here's the paradox. Your adaptability is exactly what lets the system settle in. You don't cling to old limits. When a convenience appears, a small upgrade, a slightly faster service, a slightly better option, you embrace it without thinking twice. It feels reasonable, rational, earned. And because you've always adapted successfully, you trust your judgment. You assume that following the path naturally leads to improvement. And it does, for a moment. But each small choice sets a new baseline. Each upgrade subtly redefines what enough feels like. Each shift is reasonable, deliberate, invisible. And before you know it, the comfortable life you carefully maintained is now quietly aligned with an invisible structure you didn't choose, one that nudges you forward, step by step, in ways that feel normal, natural, inevitable. You aren't failing. You aren't broken. You are exactly who the pattern works on. someone who functions, someone who plans, someone who believes they are in control. It's human. It's ordinary. And recognizing that brings relief. Because once you see it, you realize the misalignment isn't a reflection of your worth or intelligence. It's the result of your environment, your identity, and the small, predictable ways humans respond to incentives, nudges, and habits. This is why the feeling of always tight, always just enough isn't about laziness or mismanagement. It's about alignment, or rather misalignment, between the systems you live within and the person you've become. And that realization changes everything. You start to feel it, relief that you aren't broken, calm that this isn't a personal failure, understanding that being capable, adaptable, and responsible doesn't protect you from subtle influence. It just makes it invisible. It's a mirror, not a reprimand. You're allowed to nod to yourself quietly. This is human. This is familiar. And now that you see it, you can start noticing the currents without panic, without shame. Because the pattern doesn't define you. It simply explains why enough feels so far away, and why it always will, until awareness begins to reshape how you engage with it. Now that you see the currents, something shifts. Not dramatically. Not like flipping a switch. But subtly, quietly, your perception changes. Control isn't about earning more. It isn't about stricter budgets or punishing rules. Those measures never fix the feeling anyway. You've tried them, or at least imagined them, and they never quite landed. Instead, control begins as noticing. You start naming the patterns that guide your choices, the habits that moved so softly you barely realized they existed. You see how small upgrades, subtle conveniences, and invisible expectations gently redirect your spending. You slow the drift. Not by resisting, not by denying yourself, not by measuring every cent. Just by pausing long enough to recognize what is happening. You see it. You acknowledge it. And in that observation, something quiet settles. The awareness itself is enough. It doesn't demand action, change, or sacrifice. It doesn't ask you to fix everything overnight. It simply gives you clarity. The fog lifts slightly. The space between impulse and decision grows, and you begin to feel a calm form of agency. This is a different kind of freedom. One where knowing your patterns matters more than bending to them. One where the power isn't in control over every transaction, but in understanding why each choice feels inevitable. And that understanding changes how you experience your life. What once felt automatic, the small drift, the gradual stretch of your enough, now appears under your quiet scrutiny. You are no longer swept along unconsciously. You see the waves. You can float with them or push back gently. That's enough for now. No pressure. No urgency. Just awareness. Because when control starts as perception instead of restriction, you realize the rules never owned you. They only shaped the environment you lived in. And seeing that clearly, calmly, is the first step toward reclaiming what always belonged to you. A quiet sense of choice, grounded in recognition, not struggle. You breathe. You notice. And for the first time in a long while, it feels possible. You don't need lists, apps, or strict systems. You don't need to overhaul your life, declare a new budget, or shame yourself for past choices. None of that matters here. What matters is attention. Simply noticing. Feeling the weight of what feels automatic. Seeing where your patterns have quietly steered you, without judgment, without panic. You start small. A pause before ordering coffee. A glance at a subscription you didn't really think about. A thought, do I really want this? It isn't about restriction. It's about choice returning, gently, slowly, like air filling empty spaces. You realize you have agency in the little things, and that it adds up in ways that feel calm rather than urgent. Honesty is part of it too. Not blame, not shame. Just acknowledgement. You see the drift. You name it. You don't fight it, you simply notice it. And in that noticing, something shifts. The weight lifts. The tension softens. Each small moment of awareness is a quiet correction. You don't have to transform everything at once. You don't have to measure perfection. Just attention, honesty, and a gentle willingness to choose differently when it matters. And the effect is subtle but real. You feel grounded. You breathe. You notice that control isn't loud or extreme, it's quiet, patient, and yours whenever you decide to claim it. This isn't about doing more. It's about seeing clearly. And that clarity, small as it is, restores calm. You're not behind. You're not failing. You've been moving along a path that felt natural, reasonable, and responsible. No one told you where it would lead. No one gave you a map. And yet, here you are, noticing it for the first time. This isn't a warning. It's a mirror. A quiet reflection showing how patterns, context, and small nudges shaped your choices without you realizing. You weren't careless. You weren't impulsive. You were just human, moving through a system designed to feel familiar, safe, and obvious. Take a moment. Sit with this. Feel the relief that comes with recognition instead of shame. You now know awareness is enough. Choice doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. It can simply be seen, understood, and gently reclaimed. You can rewatch this later. Let it settle. Share it with someone who's been quiet about money, someone who might recognize themselves in this mirror. No pressure. No urgency. Just clarity. Just calm. This is yours to hold. Quiet, steady, and real.